Hi, everyone. I'm Rena 9, and thank you for joining us. President Trump's Labor Secretary Alexander Acosta is defending his role in a 2008 plea deal for alleged sexual abuser Jeffrey Epstein. At a press conference earlier this afternoon, Secretary Acosta says that he plans to stay in his role, citing his, quote, outstanding relationship with the president. And this comes despite growing calls from Democrats for him to step down. Numerous women have accused Epstein of sexual assault, and some of those women say that the attacks occurred when they were underage. The 2008 plea deal, which Acosta negotiated in part, forced Epstein to spend just 13 months in jail and register as a sex offender. Epstein never faced federal charges in Florida, but he was arrested in Manhattan earlier this week on separate charges of sex trafficking. According to Acosta, without that deal, Epstein would have walked away a free man.
Simply put, the Palm Beach State Attorney's Office was ready to let Epstein walk free. No jail time, nothing. Prosecutors in my former office found this to be completely unacceptable, and they became involved. Our office became involved. Our prosecutors, as this 2008 article recounts, presented the ultimatum: plead guilty to more serious charges that required jail time, registration, and restitution, or we'd roll the dice and bring a federal indictment. Without the work of our prosecutors, Epstein would have gotten away with just that state charge.
I want to bring in CBS News White House correspondent Paula Reid, who joins me now. Paula, I guess the big question, did he successfully defend his Epstein case?
Well, there he was addressing a group of reporters, but of course, Rena, he is really speaking to an audience of one. And so far, we don't have the president's reaction to this press availability. But in this press avail, the secretary expanded on much of what the president said yesterday, this theme of, well, hindsight's 2020. And Acosta went back to 2007, 2008 when he was negotiating this deal, and he tried to explain away how times were different. But Rena, I was prosecuting cases in rural Pennsylvania in 2007, 2008, so I think I can speak to a few of the points he made. First of all, he argued that way back then that people didn't fully understand the psychology of victims. He said there was a lot of victim shaming then, but that is not allowed as much now. He also argued that a lot of these victims were not very cooperative witnesses. Well, Rena, all of that was true in 2007 and 2008, just as it is today. We knew back in 2007, 2008, that victims, particularly of sexual crimes or crimes that are sexual in nature, they are complicated. They do sometimes recant. But the fact is they had potentially dozens of witnesses who they could have used to push this case forward. Now, another interesting point he makes is he tries to pin the responsibility for not disclosing this secret deal to victims. He argues that a career prosecutor felt that she should not disclose the deal to victims because if they knew they could potentially get money from Epstein, later on down the road, that could be used to undermine their credibility. Rena, I don't get that argument, and a federal judge has rejected that argument. A federal judge has found that overall, this deal violated the victims' rights by not disclosing to them that it was being arranged. And restitution, or paying you back for the damages that you incurred in a crime, that is always a potential part of a criminal prosecution. So his argument there, it really doesn't hold water. In terms of whether or not this will resonate with the president, well, he certainly gave the president praise. He called him kind. He praised him for his kind words yesterday. But it was so interesting, Rena. At one point, he said, look, the Trump administration is looking out for the forgotten man and woman. Marina, that's the point of this case. Epstein's victims, they are the forgotten women. And this case is as much about this White House. It really is. It is about the power dynamics within the justice system and how powerful people can prey on those who have fewer resources, especially when they have connections.
A lot of people feel the takeaway of this case sometimes is the fact that if you are powerful enough and have enough political connections and the money, you can escape justice. I'm slightly concerned about what was said in part of the facts where he says, when he was talking about his handling of the case, would he have handled this differently? He said the facts are being overlooked in this case. What did he mean by that, Paula?
He's trying to contextualize it. I didn't hear a new fact that would change the way this was handled, even in 2007, 2008. He did provide affidavits from people who were involved in the case at the time, but I read through them pretty quickly. They seem to say the same thing he did. They said, look, at the time, this was our decision making. But again, it's not just us looking at this. A federal judge has reviewed what is truly a sweetheart deal, how it was made in secret, and argued that this violated the rights of the victims that he was sworn to protect. So he can stand up here and argue, hey, hindsight's 2020, all he wants, but a federal judge disagrees. The Justice Department is also investigating how this was handled. Now, the office that's reviewing that, Rena, tends to historically always side with prosecutors. The Labor Secretary said that he would be willing to sit down with them for an interview, even though he notes he doesn't have to because he's not subject to the power of the Justice Department. But again, it's not clear that we need an additional assessment. A federal judge has already looked at this deal and said this was not on the up and up.
I want to play a bite for you from where he talks a little bit about transparency in the victims.
We believe that we proceeded appropriately, that based on the evidence, and not just my opinion, but I've shared the affidavit, based on the evidence, there was value to getting a guilty plea and having him register. Look, no regrets is a very hard question. At my confirmation hearing, I was asked a similar question, and one of the issues that I raised is we expect a lot more transparency today.
A lot more transparency today. I want to bring in CBS News legal analyst Rikki Klieman. Rikki, your take.
Well, I agree with Paula 100%. If there were 200%, I would add that one on. I prosecuted sexual assault cases decades before 2007. And in those prosecutions, I can also remember my boss at the time, who was John Kerry, who later we know became the Secretary of State. And I remember John Kerry actually prosecuting a case of rape of a prostitute. And I would venture a guess that that was back in the late 70s, early 80s. So one of the things that I say is the idea that by the year 2007, that if victims would get restitution, that it would affect their credibility, to me is just beyond the pale. I find it absolutely preposterous. Paul is correct that there are reluctant witnesses. There are witnesses who are frightened. But nevertheless, the job of the U.S. attorney, just like the job of the state's attorney, is to try to make the victims as comfortable as possible under the circumstances. And the idea that you wouldn't tell them about a secret arrangement because you think it wasn't DOJ policy. By 2007, I just don't buy it, even if it wasn't DOJ policy. In the early 2000s, I sat on the board of the Rape Treatment Center in Los Angeles when my husband was the chief of police. And transparency was the way we all worked. And my job in sitting on that board was to help protect the rights of victims. The prosecutor's job was to do that in a court of law. So I don't buy it, despite his extraordinarily articulate explanation, despite his demeanor, despite his ability to speak in this press conference in a calm and controlled and non-defensive way. In terms of polish, I admire what he did. In terms of substance, I disagree.
All right, I want to bring in CBS News White House correspondent as well, Ben Tracy. He was actually at the news conference, and he joins me now. You know, Ben, many people want to know from a political standpoint, does Acosta survive this? He called his relationship with Trump outstanding. Do you think this was enough?
I don't know. Only time will tell on that. The president clearly wanted him to do this. We would assume the president was watching this or will watch it at some point today, and the president will then make a decision if he feels like this was a full-throated defense of some of the decisions he made. I think you saw the secretary trying to walk a fine line there of expressing some sympathy for these victims, but he was asked several times if he would apologize to them, and he pointedly refused to do that. He basically made the case that he doesn't really deserve an apology and positioned himself as a bit of a white knight in this case, that if it were not for him, if it were not for his office, that Jeffrey Epstein would have gotten away with no jail time at all. And so that because he got involved, because of the deal he made, he's saying, well, at least he went to jail. And then he tried to explain away what many people have called a sweetheart deal, that he only served 13 months. And you heard the secretary say he was supposed to serve 18 months, and that the secretary did not know that he would be released to go to work basically 6 days a week. Jeffrey Epstein was let out of the county jail any day that he wanted, 6 days a week, to go to his office and work. That is not a normal arrangement, one could say, for somebody who is in jail. So there were a lot of questions that he kind of skirted around. He basically said that he doesn't have any regrets, even though he did say that that's a hard question to answer. Rena?
Ben, I want to thank you very much. Our Ben, Tracy, Rikki Klieman, and Paula Reid, thank you.